these Corinthian? Are these Corinthian?
No. These are early Jewish representations of great... Now if you'll gather around, these rocks are all part of the 5th century synagogue. German archaeologists were putting it together. And these were all way up high. You'll find clear around the top, all of those stones came in the synagogue. But they wanted to get these low enough so that you could see them. And what they did in all of the rock carving was to have fruit, like is from the Holy Land, pottery from the Holy Land. Each of these rosettes, here is a grape, and not citrus, because they didn't have citrus then, but all of this was decorations that was up high. And here was and is the only picture of the ark from the 5th century, carved in this stone, and it's on wheels. And when we get to the top, you see the Ark of the Covenant now is in the Ark of reading, not the fact it had the 10 Commandments, but these arks have all of the scrolls of ancient manuscripts that are pulled out and read on the Sabbath. They cover them in a kind of a felt material. And I've been in a synagogue when, of course, they take that off, they roll it open, and you can imagine how long it takes for you to unroll one page, roll up a page, unroll another page, and roll up a page. And so they, at this time, and they would leave it where it was the time before. So the way it's put together is you don't have to open it to anything, it's just the next page you roll it up. So it would have been rolled out of the way. Most of the services we will see took place from the center of the congregation, not from a pulpit. And the benches on the outside were all men, and in an upper level, and there was one here, the women could be up there, but they could never be with the men. Of course, with Orthodox rabbi, they have to be outside, and then there were some that the older synagogues always had it that way, and it was a matter of uncertain impurity. And for that reason, the women had to be outside. They could hear and participate, but only the son who had been to bar mitzvah could go. So by this time, it had the scriptures in it, and it would be rolled out of the way. But the cantor, who would be the one who was conducting the service, would be out in the center. And it's put out and it's read. When I was in a synagogue last, they then brought it out, put this covering over it, and the men would step out to the edge of the seat and would touch it and kiss their hand, and it'd be taken all through the congregation. And there are some that read it through in a year, and this one was the case that was so the service had to begin at 7 and be out at 12, 5 hours. But people didn't stay for the whole time. They would come and go, but that much had to be read. Normally, I think it's a 3-year situation where it isn't as much. Now, this has something to do with Nazareth and Jesus again, reading as one would be a cantor who would say indiscriminately, "Sir, you read this passage for the day." And that happened, and we'll talk about that later. So this is only to see what kind of fruit they had and the kind of pottery, but this one especially showing that by that time the Ark of the Covenant was on wheels. Now this was a rather upscale synagogue, and so this stone, having come from Jerusalem, would have been very expensive to import up here, where the one of Jesus' time is the black basalt, as we will see. Now, let's go over where this church is. I hope there's not here. But you can look at continuation, the designs, and all of it is to represent the Holy Land. Here is a 6-pointed star. There was a 5-pointed star up there. That too was Jewish. It's generally considered a Christian. But when I was digging in Jerusalem, both of them were found 1,000 years before Christ. So that this 5-pointed star and the 6-pointed star. But there you see the one, which is 2 triangles up and down.
When does this date?
Upside down.
What's the date on this?
This 5th century.
Why would they have the Ark of the Covenant on wheels?
Because at that time, the Ark of the Covenant had become the container of Scripture.
And the Ark, 5th century, the Ark of the Covenant was gone.
Because they roll it out so it could be there for the cantor.
Not the Ark.
That's what they call it, the Ark.
Oh, but it's not the actual
But it's the
Ark.
no, it's a continuation of the idea because it had the 10 Commandments as Scripture. So this was time when they kept, and in the Western Wall they have cabinets. And there are many of them, but they only take those out on the Sabbath generally. And that's reading from the Torah.
The ark would have been presumably taken by the Babylonians?
Oh yeah, way back in 70 AD, and the Second Temple never had anything in it at all. And of course, there are some preachers who talk about 3 temples. And the one under Zerubbabel being a second one, and the one Herod talked about, the third one can't be. Because Haggai told the people when they were discouraged about building, the desired of all nations is going to come to this temple. So what Herod did was remodel it, extend it, but it was the same temple. So it had to be to fulfill that prophecy, because it wasn't Herod's temple, it was Zerubbabel. And I think that to me is the convincing thing. I had one pastor of a large church email me, thought there were 3, but so it couldn't be. Prophecy has to prevail. This way, if you want to see what we're looking at here, is this room. And here is a drawing. You can get it from the book at the kiosk, the only place. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, perhaps 8 rooms, one of which was the dining room for all of them. So you have Peter and Andrew and Peter's wife's mother and Jesus. But all of them ate out of this dining room. Because when they excavated, and you can see the octagon churches, 2 of them, this was an earlier one, this is a later one, this is still a later one. And that was always a Byzantine type of church. And so all of the black stone was part, below the octagon shape, was part of these rooms. And they were made of stone, as you can see, but there were 3 earthen floors with broken pottery of a kitchen in it, cooking pots, lamps, and so on. And the next 6 floors were all plastered. There wasn't a house here that had a plastered floor. Very seldom. We usually find it in a palace, and it's a plaster wash because plaster was very expensive. And so from that time on, and then there was evidence that there were plastered walls. And so then they began to dig and found graffiti. Jesus, God, Most High God, Savior. And finally, they even found one of Peter and Jesus' name in different languages, which meant that 50 to 75 AD, this was a church. They were coming from different languages, and they always venerated this one room, because this would have been a dining room. But when it ceased to be a dining room now, and there were no cooking vessels found after the plaster. So from 50 AD, this is when it began to separate from a works-based religion to a orthodoxy, and so one that stimulates faith, not that's based on what you do or don't do. And so what happened? They built a wall around the 300s, and then finally, I took this from that book. And here, by the 4th century now, the 300s, that still is venerated, and the buildings are still here, but now they've encased it in a wall, so we know that they were still coming to it in the 4th century. And then this is the 5th century, but the synagogue under this one would have been from here, his home, after he was chased out of Nazareth with his family, and they would have been with him. And so these were, if you will notice, these were wooden tops. This helps you to understand that paralytic who was healed here, all you had to do to get into the roof was take these posts up and break it open, because that's sun-dried mud brick. It's easy to work, but the house was so full they had to lower him in a pallet so that Jesus could come and healed him of his paralysis. So that wasn't such a damaging thing. You put it back, you get sun-dried mud brick. Actually, I found, if you will, a roller once, which was large in the center, small on each end, and they rolled their roof every year after the rain. They'd patch it with clay and roll it again because they had to keep the water from penetrating it. And so they were still making this kind of building. And that helps us to understand that. But there is no question that this was Peter's house and that Jesus did live here, because Matthew 9:1 says that he was on the sea and he went to his house. So it wasn't way down at Nazareth, it was right here. And from that, the earliest reference, that's just after what happened at Nazareth. So he came to live here. He had visited with his family before, but being driven now, because they wanted to kill him in Nazareth, because he hadn't read the second half of the verse. I'll give you that when we get to Nazareth tomorrow. Okay?
Question?
Yes?
Is there a reason that they venerated the dining room?
Because that's where they dined, and that's, you know,
it's kind of like the center of the house,
well,
the heart of the
everybody
house.
went there. The others, maybe you didn't even go in unless you were invited. It was like houses together, but this was typifying where he ate. And to him, that was eating in common, a fellowship meal. And this is what we need to do sometimes. This is where you really get friendly, when you invite a person to come into your home and stay with you all night. We've done that.
The Williams Hotel is open, by the way.
He knows that if he's ever in Marion. Of course, anybody is. Well, any other questions?
Which one was the kitchen? Can you point that out?
Well, it was where, right in the center of that, if you went over here and looked through the door, that's the church, that octagon shape. You'll find it is right where this church was going to be the center of that, and each one always kept that the center. And that was where he died.
You can see it from above in this church.
Yeah, you could. Are
we not going up there?
No, well,
okay.
Prefer not to,
Okay.
but if you want to coming back, you can. It's just looking down inside. Now we will go to the synagogue. And this is excavated. Some's under that fence. All of the white limestone comes from this chapel, or this synagogue right here. And so this is as it was left. He has passed away now. And I went to him and I said, and he was working, I'm worked in archaeology, I would be interested in volunteering. He just turned around and left. He never wanted anybody to help. He did it all himself. And he did a magnificent job, to say the least. But it was to me so meaningful that I really wanted to do it, but he didn't take any volunteers. So look at the difference between the first church and the synagogue. All of that time. The one was about 400 years before they built this one on top of it.
That was 60. You're 60 here?
60... No, I was saying that they were coming to that as early as 50, because that's when they're now having plastered floors. There's no church, but it's the graffiti. They were coming from other places, and from the moment they started putting plaster floors, and there were 6 of those, which means you've gone through 6 periods. So it was at least up to the 4th century, because in the 300s, then they built the octagon-shaped church. I don't know who's the historian. Is Clint here? What is the reason for the octagon-shaped church? I don't know.
I don't know.
They did it in Byzantine times.
Don't know.
I just wondered if there was an answer. I thought maybe Clint Branscombe could answer. He's a theologian. Okay, follow me. But these 2 stones, one upside down like a cone, you see that? That would be, this one would be put on top of it, fitted inside to that slope, and they put a hand of wheat, for example, or grain, and then the ears on the side would be turned like this, and it cuts the hulls, and both the hulls and the grain fall below, and then they winnow it where they throw it up in the air, and the hulls will drift away. Remember Abimelech, who was Gideon's son, who was going up to try to get the people of Jabez that had not become loyal to him, and a woman had the upper millstone. Jesus, of course, remembered about saying, one who abuses a child, better off if he was thrown into the water with a millstone around his neck. And he's talking about that. They're heavy. And so this woman picked up the upper millstone, and there are some smaller and many much bigger. If you ever go to Pompeii, you'll find a bakery where they're massive. They would have been pulled around by animals. But she didn't drop it. That's the way it's translated. But she threw it, gave weight to it, and hit him in the head. And he thought he was going to die, so he told his armor bearer to take his sword and thrust him through, that it won't be said that a woman killed me. They'd rather commit suicide and have their epitaph. But that's at two lower millstones and then an upper millstone, indicating the different houses for the book that they printed and for posterity. They put it in a book. And that helps them to keep it separate, what came in. To level this one, and the one in Jesus' time had sunk. So they had to match the stones to, look at the end, it's probably 6 to 9 inches, and here we have, 3 feet or more. So to keep this one level, they had to cut the stones and from small to large until you would have, and that's the synagogue of Jesus. The Via Mars may have come through here, and of course it's as if Matthew was sitting right here, the receipt of customs. And this was a division because Herod Philip got that part across the Sea of Galilee, or the Jordan River, and Herod Archelaus down in the south, and Herod Antipas here. And Herod Antipas was the King Herod that is spoken about in the Bible during his time. So come up now into this synagogue.
Now we come out from the synagogue.
These are original seats here. These are put-in seats. That's the original seat over there. These are original as well, column bases, some reset. So you can sit there if you like. If you want the shade, you can come up here. Just come through. If you like, you can sit at these seats. Yes. And still from Galilee. That's natural stone.
This would have, Wilbur, this would have been hauled in from where?
This was made in Jerusalem. Okay. No, you wouldn't get it from any place else. Hey, Clint, come here.
Shouldn't the women be above and the men below?
Do you know why the Byzantines had an octagon-shaped church?
No, I do not.
I didn't know. I thought you.
Oh, you were not.
I don't know.
No, I don't.
Okay, now you're sitting in a synagogue the way they sat. These are original seats. This is original. That's original. The rest of it has been put in. Notice the Valentine type pillar. That's what we had at the church where Peter was. If you saw the below, it's the kind of pillar they made at that time. And this is the 5th century. And it had an upper story. Probably there was the stairs behind, and women had to look from above. But only the men sat here, and always the exterior. So the wheeled Ark of the Covenant now is rolled out and brought into the center, and the men are seated all around the outside, the same as it was on Masada with that particular. And usually synagogues were small. Understand that when they went, they left the temple. Never to return to a temple for most of them. And so what they did in the exile, they were given freedom. Ezekiel owned his own house, and so they began to gather together in homes. And gather together in Greek means synagogoge. So they were called synagogues, and therefore they were vibrant meetings of people. Men could gather, and when they came back, they brought it with them. And of course, after they rebuilt the temple, it was finished in 516. Ezra, though he was not there till 458, tells us that the people continued to worship in the synagogue. So when they came back, you can have a synagogue in every town. You can have one temple in Jerusalem. So it became a vibrant type of worship. And to this day, they have the synagogue, and they're different. You don't seat in the center, and that's where the cantor is. And so it was very luxurious, beautiful stones, enormous carvings, and these were originally that high, but that's all that was done to. Sometimes they had names of people they would put on the pillars if they gave them money for that pillar. There's one over there we can see coins to have been the synagogue that was here at least 300 years before they began to work on one above it. And one interesting thing is that where a synagogue has been, a synagogue must go back. In the Jewish quarter, where they were without the synagogues that had been built in the Jewish quarter, and they'd been used for other purposes, the Jewish people rebuilt those synagogues because it's kind of making the spot holy. So a synagogue was always built on a synagogue, and you're never to put anything else on it. So that helps you to understand a little bit. So that's what they had in the 5th century, in the late 400s, and I don't know how long it existed. Any questions at all? Well, it was a very wealthy city, one of those that Jesus condemned, along with Chorazim and Bethsaida, because they had great wealth, but they wouldn't obey his commands, and so this is one of them. You can see the industry back here of those upper and lower millstones, which were heavy, but that's the way they ground the grain. Okay, let's go out this way and then see some of those, and we'll go around and see the installations that God gave Adam, the oral law. You're supposed to give it to your children and to your children's children, and they're supposed to go on down. And by the 2nd century, they're feeling it wasn't done, perhaps earlier, but they codified the oral law 200 BC in Tiberias. And then, because they were driven out of Jerusalem, it probably would have been done there. But the point when, who was the guy, 135 AD, Bar Kokhba, drove them out because there was an uprising of the revolt, Bar Kokhba revolt, and he forbid anybody, any Jew, to live in Jerusalem. They immediately came here because this was where some of their ancestors were buried, and then Safed was the holy city. So now, what you see is a massive ark here. There's another over there. The ones that were enabling the ark to be made were the Romans. They had the keystone. You had to have a scaffolding, and if you'll see, the keystone is up here at the top. That would be the last thing put in, and then that would transfer the weight down. And so you can see how ornate it was with these continued kind of an egg or an ethrog, and all of that in the back, all of that white stone, beautiful carving, was all this particular one. And so it was a wealthy congregation at that time. But
it was part of this synagogue?
Yes, this white one. Jesus was under there. That's the local stone.
Right.
This is the stone that came from the south, which would have cost much more. But it was better to leave it this way. And of course, can you imagine the massiveness to try to rebuild that building? And take a tremendous amount of money. And it was owned by the church, not by the country. So there's no desire to do anything with anything except what is relative to both their religion and their culture. All right, and now we have a stone that tells us this was the Via Maris, because it mentions the Caesar and how far it is from Rome. And there is a pillar that had the name of the man who paid for that pillar, and it would be on so people could see it.
Doesn't Indiana Wesleyan do that by naming buildings and stuff? They put the name on the donor's name on the side. No idea.
I know everybody else was the only one.
No, too often. These are typical stone pots. You had to have purity of stone because pottery would be absorbed. But in Hebrew here is Alphaeus, the son of Zebediah, the son of John, made this column, may it be for him a blessing, 5th century A.D., which was the time of this synagogue. Here you see the oil presses. There you see a grape press where you put the grapes inside. You take your shoes off and hopefully wash your feet first, and then you mash the grapes, and the grapes will flow into a receptacle. So this is all the industry that was being made and sold from here. And where is the pillar that... oh, there it is. You see that at the bottom, Caesar... but it's telling how far, Hadrian's time, that's 135 AD. And so this is marking the Via Dolorosa coming from Egypt all the way up to Damascus and then to Europe and to Asia, and everything had to pass through this country, and so they had these signs that told how far each was. One of the most fascinating things, when you find an old Roman road, it is straight as a line, but it never cuts the hills down. It goes like this. So how did they keep it straight? And it's thought they simply, on a calm day, built a fire, and the smoke and the column, they built towards the column. They'd move the fire and build towards the column, and they were straight as it could be all of the way through. But they just paved the tops and bottoms of the valleys. Well, that's it. We're ready to go back and